Hey guys, tonight, we're trudging back into the damp, creaking streets of medieval Europe, where the morning bells are already tolling, and the sun barely filters through thick, cold fog. You step out of your crooked wooden doorway onto uneven cobblestones, your bare feet almost numb from the chill. The air smells faintly of smoke-spoiled milk, and yesterday's refuse dumped along the alley. As you look around, neighbors in patched wool cloaks scurry past without greetings, faces half hidden by cloths soaked in vinegar. You hear whispers weaving through the street like thin, trailing smoke. They murmur about another household sealed up last night, a whole family silenced behind nailed boards. 2 doors down, someone is wailing in grief so raw it pierces the heavy morning hush. The parish bell tolls again, deep and slow, counting off yet another soul who won't see sunrise tomorrow. You rub your eyes and force yourself forward, hugging your thin tunic closer to your chest. A hunched old woman stumbles by with her basket of onions and garlic, muttering prayers to ward off whatever demon is clawing through the village. Her hair is twisted up in gray ropes, her teeth yellow and jagged, but her eyes gleam with wary fear. You pause watching her shuffle away and think how every dawn seems shorter lately. The sun rises, but hope does not. Historians still argue whether the plague arrived here on Genoese ships, or if it had already slipped ashore with silent traders long before the first bell rang for mass burials. But this morning, that debate won't save you. You trudge past your neighbor's shuttered windows, hearing the muffled cries within, and the truth hits you. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now dim, the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step carefully around a pile of straw soaked in dark liquid near the tavern door. The smell is sharp and coppery, mingling with sour ale. A stray dog trots up, nose-twitching in search of scraps, its ribs showing under patchy fur. You bend to pat its bony head, but it flinches and scampers away, tail between its legs. Someone coughs behind you, a hacking, wet cough that rattles in their chest. You don't turn around. Instead, you keep walking past the blacksmith's forge where the fire is out and the anvil stands silent. The blacksmith's apprentice used to sing bawdy songs while hammering out nails and buckles. Today, the forge is cold as a crypt. The smell of baking bread drifts from the baker's hut, but it's faint and lonely. Inside, you see only the baker's wife kneading dough with red-rimmed eyes, her flour-dusted sleeves trembling. No line of customers waits by the counter. No children chase each other around the barrel of wheat. The silence is broken only by a single fly buzzing against the tiny window's greased parchment pane. You feel your stomach clench with dread as you approach the churchyard. A cart stands there, its wheels caked in old mud, its boards warped by morning dew. On it lie 3 covered shapes draped in sackcloth, stiff with cold. The parish priest stands nearby, flicking holy water in weary half-circles lips, murmuring words he's said too many times this week. A mainstream historical fact in some plague-stricken towns, death tolls reach 60-70% of the entire population, within weeks leaving only a fraction of townsfolk to bury the countless dead. Your eyes drift to a scrawny boy sitting cross-legged by the church wall, eyes wide and blank. He holds a little carved horse in his lap, running his thumb along its chipped wooden mane. His parents' names were called by the bell at dawn. You want to comfort him, but your mouth stays shut. What is there to say? As you walk on, a fringe tidbit returns to mind how some people believed sleeping with a split fig pressed to each armpit could draw out the poison, or that cooked onions stuffed under the bed would trap the sickness before it reached the lungs. These tiny rituals felt like power even as the plague slipped past them, silent as night fog curling under the door. You reach the edge of the village where the fields spread out in tidy rows brightening under reluctant sun. Beyond the hedgerow, the forest stands black and still, as if watching with mild disdain. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of earth and rotting leaves, trying to imagine a life where death is not crouched outside your window. But then the bell tolls again. Another soul has slipped away before breakfast. You trudge past the hedgerow into a smaller lane that winds behind the baker's hut and towards the herbalist cottage. The smell changes here. It's richer, layered with pungent rosemary old lavender bundles, and something sharper, almost like vinegar, and moldy figs rotting together under the June sun. Outside the herbalist's door, you see townsfolk lined up in hushed desperation. A woman clutches her toddler close, pressing a tiny cloth bag of dried sage and marjoram to his chest. The boy is feverish, sweat glistening on his temples, eyes glassy as he stares at the dirt path without blinking. His mother mutters prayers under her breath, words tangled with sobs. Another man stands near the door with handfuls of figs, pressing their soft skins to his armpits, one by one, then dropping them into a woven basket lined with old rags. The herbalist had told him to do it twice daily, swapping each fig before it rotted completely. He smells sweet and sour like wine turned bad, and his eyes flick nervously at anyone who dares to cough. You step aside as the herbalist emerges. Her hair is tucked under a thick wool coif, her sleeves rolled high to reveal arms stained green and brown with crushed herbs and roots. In one hand she holds a bundle of rosemary, thyme, and wormwood tied with twine. She waves it through the air like a feeble scepter, murmuring protective incantations she learned from an old Saxon manuscript, or maybe from her grandmother's kitchen lessons. Historians still argue whether these herb rituals stemmed from ancient pagan customs, or were purely medieval medical theory born of trial error and terror. She thrusts a small pouch into a farmer's hand, instructing him to hang it around his neck, sleep with it under his pillow, and place 3 figs by the window ledge to ward off death's shadow. The farmer nods fervently, eyes wide with unspoken fear. You can almost hear his thoughts. If this doesn't work, nothing will. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your sleepy mind plague amulets, and pomanders filled with spices, amber, or perfumed wax were commonly carried to filter or repel the miasma, the foul air believed to carry disease before germ theory existed. You shuffle forward in the line, feeling the weight of your own little cloth sachet tied at your belt. Inside is a jumble of rosemary, dried orange peel, and garlic cloves. It rattles slightly as you walk, a small whisper of hope against the silence of the dying village. A breeze brushes your cheek, and you catch a waft of decay from the fig basket. The herbalist's cottage itself is a riot of scent. Bundles of thyme hang drying from the beams, baskets overflow with marigold blossoms and mustard seeds, while clay pots of infused oil crowd her window ledge. She turns back inside, ducking under the low lintel. You glance through the warped glass. Inside, a pot bubbles over a smoky peat fire. She stirs it absently with a carved ashwood stick, humming a thin, tuneless chant. On a low table beside her, several ivory-handled knives lie in neat rows alongside small lumps of dark resin and a twisted horn spoon crusted with dried honey. You remember a fringe tidbit some healers recommended: slicing a pigeon in half and strapping its warm, bloody flesh to the soles of plague victims' feet to draw out the corruption. The pigeons didn't survive. Most humans didn't either. A donkey brays loudly from somewhere near the well. You flinch at the sudden noise, then watch as a scrawny boy tugs its rope halter, trying to lead it away from a patch of nettles. The donkey is stubborn ears, flicking back eyes dull with indifference to human plans. You almost envy it. If only you could stand there chewing nettles and ignoring bells tolling for your kin. Behind you, a tall merchant sighs dramatically, fanning himself with a folded scrap of parchment. He wears a thick necklace of dried rose petals, clove, and crushed juniper berries. The smell is so strong it nearly makes your eyes water. He catches you staring and lifts his chin, proclaiming that his sachet was imported from Venice at enormous cost. Apparently, Venetian herbal blends are superior to local swamp reeds and kitchen herbs. You nod politely, but silently think he smells like the bottom of a stale spice chest. Historians still argue whether imported herbs and spices had any genuine protective properties, or if their true power lay in psychological comfort, a sense of agency against the invisible killer creeping from door to door. You step forward, offering your last silver penny for a fresh bundle of rosemary. The herbalist takes it without comment, her thumb rough and cracked, as it brushes your palm. She hands you the fragrant bundle. You bury your nose in its dark green stems, letting the sharp, bitter scent fill your lungs. For a moment, you almost feel safe. But then a crow caws harshly from the roof beam overhead, and you remember the covered cart outside the churchyard. You tuck the rosemary bundle into your belt, its stalks brushing your wrist like a mother's fleeting touch, and turn away from the herbalist's cottage. The line shuffles on behind you, each person clutching herbs, figs, or onions against their chest, like shields in a battle already lost. You keep walking back towards the main square where the air lies heavy and still filled with the faint scent of rosemary, rotting figs, and despair. You walk back towards the village square, and before you even see them, you hear the clack of wooden soles on stone. Turning the corner, you stop short as two towering figures loom ahead. Plague doctors in their long, dark robes and thick leather gloves. Their wide-brimmed hats tilt downwards, and each wears a mask shaped like an enormous bird's beak, curving out over their chests. It is almost comical, like a gloomy carnival costume, until you see the blank glass circles covering their eyes. No expression, no human warmth, just twin black lenses staring out at the dying world. One of them turns towards you, slowly adjusting the beak slightly. Inside the hollow nose are stuffed bundles of herbs. Thyme rose petals, lavender wormwood, anything pungent to filter out the poisonous airs. Historians still argue whether these bird masks were purely protective, or if they were also designed to frighten plague demons away with their grotesque shape. Either way, they frighten you well enough. The doctor lifts a thin wooden cane and taps it against your chest lightly. He doesn't speak. He simply nudges you aside with the stick as if herding a stray goat. You shuffle backwards, heart pounding in your throat, and watch as he waddles on down the road robes, flapping around his thin shins like a sickly crow trying to take flight. A mainstream historical fact slips into your weary thoughts plague. Doctors were hired by city councils to treat both rich and poor, but they rarely cured anyone. Their main tasks were tallying the dead and documenting symptoms for morbid municipal records. The second doctor is crouched by a coughing woman seated on the ground. He uses his cane to lift her chin, peering through those dark glass circles into her sunken eyes. She wheezes wetly, her mouth trembling as she tries to speak. With gloved fingers, he reaches into a small leather pouch at his waist and pulls out a vial of dark syrup. Uncorking it with a sharp tug, he tilts her head back and pours a few thick drops onto her tongue. She coughs harder, gagging on its bitter taste. The doctor simply caps the vial again, wipes his gloves on his robe, and stands up. His companion taps her on the shoulder with his stick, muttering a quiet blessing in Latin before moving on. You notice a fringe tidbit whispered by a toothless old beggar nearby. Some plague doctors stuffed their beaks with camphor-soaked sponges or vinegar rags, believing the sharp fumes would keep corruption away. The smell was so strong that people fainted just standing near them. You step aside as the doctors pass their canes clicking against cobblestones like thin metronomes counting down a grim clock. Behind them, a young apprentice struggles to keep up carrying a basket filled with pouches of dried herbs, glass vials of pungent oil, and bundles of narrow white cloth strips. His eyes dart from face to face, wide with terror. Every cough makes him flinch. As the trio disappears around the far corner, silence rushes back in, heavy and suffocating. The square feels emptier now, as if they sucked away all remaining hope with their waddling departure. You notice a shopkeeper kneeling by his stall of wilted cabbages, muttering to himself. He wears a thick garlic braid around his neck, the bulbs thumping against his chest as he rocks back and forth. Historians still argue whether the doctor's layered waxed robes and leather gloves offered any genuine protection, or if their apparent success was mere luck, aided by limited exposure and grim selection bias. After all, not every doctor survived to remove his bird mask at journey's end. A crow lands nearby, tilting its sleek black head at you with bright, curious eyes. For a moment, it almost looks like the plague doctors themselves. A little leather cloak of feathers, silent and watchful. It hops closer, pecking at a rotting fig dropped by the herbalist customer earlier. Its beak pierces the soft skin with a wet squelch, and the scent rises up ripe and sickly sweet. You turn away, eyes watering, and walk on towards the parish steps. Each footfall feels heavier, as though the stones themselves are pulling you down into the earth. A child's sobs echo from an alley, fading into hiccups, then silence. A distant dog barks, once then nothing. Overhead, dark clouds gather, curling and folding like ink drifting through water. A breeze picks up carrying the smell of rosemary, rotting figs, and something coppery and sour. The scent of a world holding its breath as the doctor's bird masks disappear behind shuttered windows, leaving only you and your small cloth pouch of dried herbs to guard against what comes next. You continue walking, feet dragging through scattered straw and damp dirt as you leave the parish square behind. The air feels colder here, heavier. Ahead, the road narrows and curves past old timber-framed houses leaning inwards, their eaves almost touching. Smoke curls from a few crooked chimneys, though the smell is faint, as if even fire is losing heart. You reach a fork in the path where wooden boards are nailed crudely across the way. A thick rope is knotted around each post, blocking passage with sagging finality. Beyond it lies a small cluster of houses and barns. From where you stand, it looks peaceful. A narrow lane lined with mossy stones, chickens pecking its seed, a cow flicking its tail lazily. But nailed to the central post is a rough plank, painted with black tar. No entry. Plague. You place your hand on the rope and lean forward slightly, peering into the stillness. A faint breeze carries the smell of hay and manure mingled with something sharper. The sour, metallic tang of sickness. A scrawny cat sits atop the boards, licking its paw with slow indifference. Its fur is patchy and thin eyes glowing yellow in the gray morning light. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your mind like a flickering candle. Entire villages and urban wards were sealed under quarantine during plague waves, with penalties of whipping, branding, or death for anyone who attempted to leave. You see movement near the far house. A woman stands in the doorway wrapped in a stained linen sheet. Her hair is loose and unwashed, eyes blank as she stares at nothing. At her feet lies a small bundle of rags that you realize with a cold twist in your stomach as a child curled in silent fever sleep. The woman doesn't even blink as a chicken clucks around her ankles, scratching the dirt for hidden beetles. Historians still argue whether these strict quarantines slowed plague spread meaningfully or if they simply delayed the inevitable while condemning trapped residents to starve in isolation. To the left of the barricade, a man in brown homespun sits against a fence post, head in his hand. His hat lies beside him in the dirt, crushed and dusty. Tied around his neck is a sprig of rosemary and a loop of dry onions, their papery skins rattling softly each time he breathes. He rocks back and forth, whispering prayers under his breath. You can't hear the words, but you recognize the cadence. A desperate rhythm seeking divine mercy. A fringe tidbit flickers across your thoughts during certain plague outbreaks. Villagers would bury onions around their doorways and windowsills convinced the bulbs could absorb or block the poison in the air. When the onions rotted quickly, it was seen as proof that evil vapors had been trapped within. The man lifts his head suddenly, eyes red-rimmed and wild. He glares at you with a hollow desperation, as if blaming you for your freedom to stand on the clean side of the rope. But then his gaze drops again to the dirt between his knees, and he starts rocking once more, onions rustling faintly. You step back from the barricade, suddenly aware of your own shallow breathing. The rope creaks under your touch. A fly buzzes past your face and lands on the tarred plank, its tiny feet, leaving no mark on the black streaks. You brush it away, and it lifts into the heavy air, circling once before disappearing into the shadows beyond the boards. Further down the road, you see another barricade, this one stronger. Thick timber beams lashed together with hemp rope, braced against the gate into a small hamlet. Two men stand guard there, wearing rough leather gloves and scarves, wrapped tightly around nose and mouth. Each carries a long pole tipped with an iron hook. They lean on their poles wearily, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion and dread. At their feet sits a small basket containing a crust of bread, 2 shriveled apples, and a pewter mug of thin ale. Neither seems interested in eating. Historians still argue whether these barricade guards were volunteers driven by loyalty or impoverished men desperate for coin and slightly safer positions away from direct plague care. One of them notices you staring. He straightens up, squinting into the morning dim, and lifts his pole an inch off the ground in weary greeting. You nod back silently. For a moment, the only sounds are the rustle of your rosemary bundle in the breeze, the faint creak of the rope barricade, and a distant crow crying somewhere in the trees. You turn away and keep walking, boots scuffing dirt and pebbles. The road curves back towards the village center where the parish bell begins its slow toll once more. Another death, another soul untethered. You feel the vibrations of the bell echo through the stones under your feet, up through your legs, humming faintly in your bones. As you walk, you clutch your little cloth sachet to your chest, breathing in the bitter rosemary and wondering how many more barricades will rise before this silent, creeping nightmare is done. You leave behind the barricaded streets and step into the dim, shadowy spaces beneath sagging rooftops, where rats dart swiftly, their beady eyes catching the meager light. You barely notice them at first, just quick flickers of gray and brown tails, disappearing into cracks and piles of discarded straw. But as you walk further, the subtle scratching and rustling grows louder like a restless whisper beneath the village's weary breath. A mainstream historical fact nudges your thoughts, rats specifically. Black rats played an infamous role in spreading the plague by carrying fleas infected with Yersinia pestis. The bacterium behind the disease, these fleas, once they fed on infected rats, could jump to humans and unleash the deadly sickness. You recall how historians still argue about the exact pathways of transmission, whether it was primarily through flea bites or respiratory droplets in later stages. You crouch beside an overturned barrel where a small colony of rats scampers their sleek bodies slick with dirt and grime. One pauses its nose twitching as it sniffs the air, then scurries on. You wonder if they sense the death that follows them, or if they live utterly oblivious, indifferent to the despair painted on the faces of the villagers. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some medieval folks believed that rats themselves were supernatural creatures, or even demons in disguise sent to punish humanity. In some towns, furious mobs hunted rats with torches and pitchforks, hoping to halt the plague by eradicating these shadowy harbingers. It never seemed to help much. As you walk along the narrow alley, you notice a small rat trap, a simple box made from splintered wood and a crude wire latch. Inside lies a piece of stale bread smeared with honey. You remember a merchant from the square boasting that rats could be lured away by traps baited with sweets, but whether anyone ever caught enough to stop the spread is doubtful. Above you, the rafters creak softly. You glance up to see a patchwork of wooden beams thick with cobwebs and dust. Somewhere above, a pair of rats wrestle playfully, their tiny squeaks muffled by the thick thatch. It strikes you how life continues even in the face of such bleakness. Fleas, rats, humans, all intertwined in a deadly dance nobody fully understood. You step carefully, mindful of the scattered rubbish along the street. Broken pottery shards, rotting vegetables, and discarded cloth bits, stained dark with age and neglect. A sudden scurry catches your attention. A rat bursts from beneath a pile of old clothes, startling a woman nearby. She screams softly, clutching her chest as the rat disappears into a nearby hole. Historians still argue whether the sanitation conditions in medieval cities made rat infestations inevitable, or if there were attempts to improve cleanliness that slowed plague outbreaks. Some argue the filthy streets and stagnant waste created perfect breeding grounds for rats and fleas, while others point to climate and rodent population shifts as more decisive factors. You pause near a stagnant well, its surface covered with a thin film of algae and floating debris. The smell here is sharp, a mix of mud decay and something metallic. A rat drinks cautiously at the edge, whiskers twitching. You wonder how many rats have died here, how many have fled to new hiding spots carrying death's passengers on their backs. A child's laughter echoes faintly from a distant courtyard, almost surreal in this quiet horror. You follow the sound and find a little girl with tangled hair, barefoot, and Dusty playing with a tiny carved wooden rat on a string. She laughs freely, unaware of the invisible menace lurking just beyond the walls. You remember that rattling in your own pouch? The rosemary, dried orange peel, and garlic that you clutch like a small shield? It feels fragile, almost laughable against the enormity of disease racing through the alleys. A crow caws overhead, dark wings slicing the gray sky, and you shiver. Recalling the plague doctors masked with their strange beaked faces, reminders that sometimes the line between human and animal was frighteningly thin. You take a deep breath and keep moving forward, the rats slipping into the shadows behind you like ghosts of a forgotten world. You press on your steps, echoing faintly on the uneven stones as you enter the heart of the village. The atmosphere changes. The air thickens with murmurs of devotion and pain. Along the narrow street, you see a procession gaunt figures moving slowly, whipping their backs with leather straps. blood seeping through the ragged shirts. Their eyes are glazed faces, pale but fierce with a strange, frenzied determination. These are the flagellants. You watch as they chant rhythmically, the whip strikes punctuating their songs of penance. A mainstream historical fact surfaces during the plague. Flagellant movements swept through Europe convinced that inflicting pain upon themselves would atone for humanity's sins and halt the deadly scourge. Thousands joined marching from town to town, whipping in public displays of suffering. You edge closer, noticing one man whose back is raw and bleeding, yet his face holds a peculiar serenity. His voice cracks as he sings a prayer, eyes fixed on the sky as if pleading for mercy from above. Another woman stumbles her whip, falling silent, her knees buckling, but the others gently lift her up, encouraging the relentless self-punishment. A fringe tidbit makes you pause. Some flagellants believe their whipping summoned angels, or cleansed the air of plague demons, blurring the lines between religious ritual and desperate superstition. Others feared these groups worsened the spread by gathering crowds during times of contagion. Nearby, a child hides behind a wooden cart, clutching a doll with a bird mask similar to the plague doctor's. You wonder if the child understands the symbolism or simply copies what adults do to survive. Historians still argue whether flagellant movements genuinely slowed the plague's progress or unintentionally hastened it by encouraging mass gatherings. Some say the church condemned the flagellants for their unorthodox practices, fearing social unrest more than the disease itself. The chanting fades as the group moves on, leaving behind the scent of sweat, blood, and damp wool. You notice a half-burned candle on the ground, its wax melted into the dirt, symbolizing fleeting hope. You take a deep breath, the air tasting heavy with incense and fear. A stray dog trots by, its ribs visible beneath matted fur eyes, reflecting the dim light like haunted pools. It pauses, sniffs the ground, then moves on without a sound. Your hands clutch your sachet tighter. The dried herbs inside feel warm, a tiny comfort amid the vast suffering. You step away from the procession and toward a quiet corner where a woman knits nervously, whispering prayers under her breath, the repetitive motion a fragile barrier against despair. Above the sky is leaden clouds pressing low as if ready to crush the earth beneath. The bell tolls again, slow and relentless. You pause, letting the moment settle, the flagellant's echoes fading into the shadows. The world is weary, raw, and waiting. You wonder how much longer this merciless chapter will last. You follow a narrow, twisting lane where the shadows of shuttered windows loom like silent watchers. Despite the barricades and the flagellant's cries, commerce continues in stubborn defiance. You spot a merchant, pale and thin, leaning close to a small makeshift table stacked with bolts of rough cloth and strings of dried herbs. His eyes flick anxiously toward the empty street, but he keeps arranging his goods. You watch as he exchanges a few coins for a small bundle of rosemary and a vial of pungent oil with a nervous woman cloaked in faded velvet. They whisper hurriedly, glancing around as if the plague itself might be listening. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. Trade networks, both local and long distance, persisted during plague outbreaks despite quarantines, with merchants sneaking goods and money through guarded gates and checkpoints. Economic survival often clashed with fear of contagion. The merchant adjusts his wares and pulls a small knife from his belt, deftly slicing a piece of cured meat for a thirsty rat hiding beneath the table. You smirk, business as usual, even if the customers are fewer and the price is higher. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some merchants allegedly spread plague rumors deliberately to corner markets, or sabotage rivals, weaponizing fear in a deadly game of profit and survival. You wonder if today's merchant might be part of such a subtle war. Nearby, a cart rattles by, piled high with barrels of wine and crates of salted fish. The driver, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, keeps one wary eye on the road and another on the guard stationed at the village's edge. They exchange whispered signals before slipping past the barricades with their illicit cargo. Historians still argue whether trade during the plague helped spread the disease faster, or if quarantines and controls managed to limit infection despite widespread smuggling. The tangled web of economics and disease defies easy answers. You notice a young girl watching the merchant from a dark doorway, her face streaked with dirt, but eyes bright with curiosity. She holds a small wooden toy horse, its paint chipped and faded. You wonder if she dreams of better days, or if the plague has already stolen her innocence. The merchant catches your gaze and offers a forced smile. He wipes sweat from his brow and leans in conspiratorially. No one wants to admit it, he whispers. But life has to go on even when death walks the streets. You nod, feeling the weight of his words. The world is caught between holding its breath and forging ahead a fragile dance of desperation and hope. A soft breeze stirs your rosemary bundle at your waist. The scent is faint but comforting, like a small shield against the dark. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and keep walking toward the next chapter of this quiet, relentless story. You find yourself at the edge of a small courtyard, where whispered stories float in the heavy air like fragile moths. People gather in quiet clusters, sharing tales in hushed tones, tales of those who somehow escaped the plague's deadly grasp. You strain your ears, catching fragments of conversations about the untouchables, the lucky, the strange few who lived while everyone around them fell. You hear of an old woman who tended to her sick husband every day, never once showing symptoms herself. Some say she drank a mysterious herbal brew. Others whisper she was blessed or cursed with strange immunity. A mainstream historical fact nudges you awake during plague outbreaks. A minority of individuals survived, possibly due to genetic resistance or previous exposure to related diseases, though the exact reasons remain elusive. A young man tells a story of a healer who wore thick gloves and stayed outside the homes of the sick, handing out poultices and prayers without ever falling ill. Locals say she slept surrounded by garlic and always carried a sprig of rosemary tucked behind her ear. The crowd nods solemnly, hoping to glimpse a pattern in the chaos. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some believe survivors were marked by divine favor or had made pacts with supernatural forces, while others thought plague immunity came from bloodlines connected to ancient noble families. You smile to yourself, imagining a secret society of plague-proof aristocrats sipping wine while peasants suffered. Historians still argue whether reports of plague immunity reflect actual biological resistance or are embellished folklore meant to inspire hope and explain the inexplicable. The truth remains buried beneath layers of myth and fear. You watch a woman carefully tend to her garden, planting herbs like rue wormwood and lavender plants thought to protect against evil spirits and sickness. She hums softly, her hands steady despite the trembling in her eyes. Children play nearby, their laughter fragile and fleeting. You catch the faint scent of burning herbs and incense drifting from a nearby house, where a priest blesses the home of a family just recovered from illness. The priest sprinkles holy water, his voice low and soothing, hoping to cleanse the lingering shadows. As you move through the courtyard, a child hands you a small bundle of dried flowers tied with a fraying ribbon. You accept it gratefully, feeling the rough petals brush against your fingers. It's a small token of hope amid despair. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingled scents of earth herbs and distant smoke. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the cobblestones. The bell tolls softly in the distance, a gentle reminder of the fragile balance between life and death. You clutch your sachet of rosemary tighter, feeling its faint warmth a small comfort. As you step forward into the fading light, you trudge deeper into the village, drawn by the thick columns of smoke, rising from open hearths and bonfires blazing in courtyards. The scent of burning wood mixes with faint hints of herbs and something sharper ashes of rotting refuse consumed by flame. Smoke curls upward, weaving into the heavy gray sky, as villagers desperately try to purify the poisoned air. A mainstream historical fact floats through your thoughts. City councils and local authorities often ordered large bonfires during plague outbreaks, believing the smoke would cleanse the miasma or foul air carrying disease. These fires burned day and night, consuming anything suspected of harboring poison, clothing, bedding, even entire carts of garbage. You approach a pile of discarded belongings stacked near a great fire. Old cloaks, stained linen, broken pottery, and charred wooden utensils glow orange at the edges as flames lick hungrily. A woman throws another bundle onto the fire, her face lit by flickering light eyes, weary but resolute. A fringe tidbit emerges. Some communities believe that burning tar, brimstone, and fragrant resins alongside wood could create a smoke potent enough to ward off evil spirits or plague demons hiding in the air. Others thought the fires also scared off rats and other vermin believed to carry disease. You watch a group of men stirring a large cauldron filled with boiling water herbs and animal fats. They ladle thick black smoke into the air, chanting prayers as the fire crackles. Nearby, children huddle around a smaller fire, roasting chestnuts and sharing quiet stories. Historians still argue whether these bonfires actually helped reduce plague transmission, or if they sometimes made conditions worse by forcing people out of their homes and concentrating crowds around the smoke. You feel the warmth of the fire on your face mingling with the sharp scent of smoke and pine. Ash falls gently around you like cold snowflakes settling on your shoulders and mingling with the dust on your cloak. Nearby, a man coughs, violently clutching a rag to his mouth as he staggers away from the flames. Another woman stoops to tend a sick child wrapped in faded wool blankets. Their faces are grim shadows cast by flickering flames. You think back to the herbalist bundles and the plague doctor's strange masks and wonder if the smoke is just another layer in the endless attempt to fight an invisible enemy. As dusk deepens, the bonfires burn brighter, casting long, dancing shadows across the village walls. The night will be long, and the fires will burn until the plague fades or until the village itself is consumed. You pull your rosemary bundle closer. The scent faint but steady, a tiny anchor in the smoky night. The bell tolls once more, slow and deep, vibrating through the smoky air and into your bones. You breathe deeply, feeling the fire's warmth and the night's cold mingling as you prepare to walk onward. The village is quieter now. You blink against the smoky haze lingering in the air, and suddenly the relentless tolling of bells begins to fade like a distant heartbeat, slowing to a whisper. The streets feel emptier, the usual clatter of footsteps and murmured prayers replaced by an eerie stillness. You step cautiously into the square. The carts that once bore the dead are gone, the piles of ashes from burning belongings reduced to dull gray heaps. Windows that once bore hastily nailed boards now stand cracked open as if inviting fresh air to wash away the lingering dread. A mainstream historical fact seeps into your mind after months or years of devastation. Plague outbreaks often receded as mysteriously as they appeared, with death rates declining sharply despite the absence of medical treatment or vaccines. The reasons remain partly unclear. You notice a few townsfolk cautiously emerging from their homes, faces pale but alive, stepping over cracked stones and fallen leaves. A child laughs softly nearby, chasing a stray dog through the dust. The air smells faintly of rain and new growth. A fringe tidbit comes to you? Some survivors believe the plague simply gave up, or that divine intervention had ended the suffering. Others thought the plague had run out of new victims retreating to unknown corners where it could rest before returning. You can almost hear whispered speculations carried on the breeze. Historians still argue whether the sudden disappearance of plague was due to changes in the rat and flea populations, shifts in human behavior, climatic changes, or even evolutionary adaptation by the bacterium itself. The truth remains tantalizingly out of reach. You breathe in deeply, tasting the crispness of cool air mixed with the lingering scent of rosemary and burnt herbs. The village feels fragile, like a glass ornament balanced on a thread. You pass the empty herbalist shop, the door hanging slightly ajar. Inside, bundles of dried herbs sway gently in a non-existent breeze, their colors muted in the dim light. You wonder if the herbalist has survived or vanished with the others. A distant church bell rings softly, not tolling death, but calling the few survivors back to prayer and community. The world seems to be holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next. You clutch your little sachet tightly, feeling the warmth of the rosemary against your palm, a small beacon amid the quiet aftermath. The sun dips low, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The village breathes again, cautiously hopeful. You step forward, feeling the weight of history settle gently around you. As the plague fades into memory, leaving questions that will linger for centuries, you wander through the village as the days grow lighter, and the scent of spring returns soft and tentative. The scars of plague are still everywhere, empty homes with doors swinging, loose gardens, left wild and untended, the faint echo of voices long silenced. Yet life is stubborn. Here and there you see signs of renewal, fresh shoots pushing through cracked stone children, playing with chipped wooden toys and the first tentative smiles of those who survived. A mainstream historical fact filters through your thoughts. After plague outbreaks, many towns experience significant social and economic shifts, including labor shortages that empowered surviving workers and prompted changes in land use and wages. You notice an old man sitting by a well, his hands gnarled, but steady as he mends a worn leather shoe. He looks up and nods briefly, eyes reflecting the quiet resilience of those who endured. Nearby, women tend small gardens, planting herbs and vegetables with care, hoping for better seasons. A fringe tidbit tickles your mind. Some communities believe that areas struck hardest by plague were blessed afterward with fertile soil and healthier crops, as if the earth itself had been purified by suffering. You smile at the hopeful superstition, imagining fields blooming bright after so much death. Historians still argue whether the economic changes following plague outbreaks contributed to the eventual decline of feudal systems, or if those shifts were part of broader, more complex trends. The cause and effect remain a tangled web. You pause near the village square now, filled with the faint murmur of markets reopening. Vendors shout softly, displaying fresh produce, pottery, and cloth. The air smells sweet with baking bread and blooming flowers. Children dart between stalls, their laughter ringing clear and bright. A group of musicians tunes lutes and fiddles, readying for a feast to celebrate the village's slow return to life. You listen, letting the music wash over you, a balm after so much silence. You clutch your rosemary bundle once more, now dried but still fragrant, a symbol of endurance. The scent mingles with warm sunlight and the distant sound of church bells calling the faithful. As you walk through the reborn village, you feel the weight of history around you, heavy but softened by hope and renewal. You breathe deeply, savoring the fragile peace as the plague's dark shadow fades into the past. You wander beyond the village, stepping onto dusty country roads lined with blooming hedgerows and wildflowers pushing through cracked earth. The world feels different here, quieter, less burdened by the heavy toll of death and fear. The air is fresher, tinged with the sweet scent of honeysuckle and the distant hum of bees. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. After the plague, many survivors sought refuge in the countryside, fleeing crowded towns where sickness lingered like a stubborn fog. Rural areas often experienced less severe outbreaks, partly due to lower population density. You pause beside a weathered wooden fence, watching a farmer tend to his fields. His hands move sure and steady, planting seeds with careful hope. A dog lies nearby, lazily swatting flies, its tail wagging in slow rhythm. The farmer looks up and nods, a quiet acknowledgement of shared endurance. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some believe that rural folk used charms made from thorns, feathers, and roots to protect themselves from plague spirits, blending Christian prayers with older folk magic. You smile, imagining these small acts of defiance against an unseen enemy. Historians still argue whether the plague's retreat led to lasting changes in rural society, including shifts in land ownership and agricultural practices. The evidence is complex, layered beneath centuries of change. You continue walking, the sun warm on your face, casting dappled shadows across the road. A blackbird sings from a nearby tree, its melody bright and clear against the gentle rustle of leaves. The contrast is striking, life returning in defiance of death's long shadow. You come across a small graveyard, weathered stones leaning at odd angles. Some markers bear simple crosses. Others are unmarked mounds of earth. A wild rose bush blooms at the edge, its petals delicate and pale. You kneel briefly, placing your rosemary sachet gently among the stones. The scent mingles with fresh earth and fading memories. A soft breeze stirs the petals, carrying whispers of past sorrows and quiet hope. As you rise, you feel the weight of centuries in the soil beneath your fingers, lives lost, stories unfinished, and the slow, steady pulse of survival. You breathe deeply, savoring the moment's peace before stepping back onto the road, ready to continue the journey beyond the plague's end. You follow a narrow path leading into a dense thicket where the forest seems to hold its breath. Shafts of pale sunlight pierce the canopy, casting shifting patterns on moss-covered stones and fallen leaves. The air is cool and damp, alive with the subtle hum of insects and the distant calls of unseen birds. A mainstream historical fact surfaces during plague outbreaks. Some communities sought refuge deep in the forests, isolating themselves from infected towns and villages. These makeshift sanctuaries, though primitive, offered safety through solitude and distance. You tread carefully, your boots sinking slightly into soft earth. Along the path, you notice carved wooden crosses marking small hidden burial sites. These graves, hastily dug and sometimes anonymous, tell stories of those whose deaths came swiftly and quietly away from the watchful eyes of the village. A fringe tidbit floats through your thoughts. Some survivors believe that spirits of the plague haunted these woods, wandering restless and vengeful. Travelers carried charms made of iron nails, wolf teeth, or woven grasses to ward off these ghostly apparitions. Historians still argue whether such isolated refugees genuinely reduced infection rates or simply delayed the inevitable return of the disease once survivors rejoined broader society. The effectiveness of isolation remains a topic of ongoing research. You pause near a clearing where wildflowers bloom in surprising profusion. Bluebells, primroses, and delicate white daisies. Their fragile beauty contrasts starkly with the somber history etched into the land. A solitary figure appears ahead, a woman wrapped in a coarse wool cloak, her face weathered but calm. She carries a basket filled with freshly picked herbs and wild berries. She nods silently as you approach, eyes reflecting quiet resilience. You exchange no words but feel an unspoken connection, a shared understanding of survival and the thin line between life and death. The forest breathes around you, leaves whispering secrets on the breeze. You clutch your rosemary pouch tightly, the familiar scent, a small comfort amid the ancient shadows. As you turn to leave the clearing, a shaft of sunlight catches a cluster of spiderwebs sparkling like fragile lace. You pause, mesmerized by their delicate beauty, a reminder that even in darkness, life finds a way. You step back onto the path, ready to rejoin the village and the world, slowly awakening from its plague-induced slumber. You return to the village, stepping cautiously over uneven cobblestones and past shuttered windows that are slowly being thrown open to welcome the fresh air. The quiet you encounter now is different, not the heavy silence of despair, but a tentative calm, a fragile truce between life and death. The scent of drying herbs and fresh bread fills the air, mingling with the faint echoes of footsteps and soft laughter. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind after the plague waned. Communities often came together for rituals of purification and remembrance, church services, feasts, and ceremonies meant to honor the dead and ward off any lingering evil. You pass a group gathered near the village well. They are lighting candles, their flickering flames casting gentle shadows on faces marked by loss and hope. A young girl carries a small bouquet of rosemary and lavender, placing it carefully beside a carved wooden cross. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some villagers believed that planting rosemary in the soil near graves could protect the living from future outbreaks. Others thought that carrying a sprig of rosemary could ensure dreams free from plague demons. Historians still argue whether these rituals were primarily religious solace or practical community healing. But their importance in restoring social bonds is undeniable. You move on toward the village green where musicians tune instruments for an evening gathering. Children chase each other, their laughter a bright thread, weaving through the quiet hum of the gathering crowd. The village feels alive again, cautious perhaps, but alive. You catch sight of the old herbalist from earlier now, sitting outside his shop, smiling faintly as he mends bundles of dried herbs. He nods at you, a silent acknowledgement of shared endurance. The sun sets, slowly casting a golden glow that softens the edges of the world. You feel the weight of centuries, the suffering, the survival, the strange resilience of humanity. You clutch your rosemary sachet one last time, inhaling its gentle scent as the village settles into evening. The distant church bell rings softly, not a toll, but a song, an invitation to rest, to remember, and to hope. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over you, and prepare to step gently into the final moments of this journey. You settle onto a worn wooden bench beneath an ancient oak tree in the village square. The night wraps around you like a soft blanket, cool and still broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Above, the stars pierce the velvet sky, silent witnesses to centuries of human struggle and survival. You reflect on the long journey through shadowed streets, barricaded alleys, and smoky bonfires. The plague's grim tale is one of fear and death, but also of hope, resilience, and the unyielding human spirit. You clutch your rosemary sachet, its faint scent a small, steady comfort against the vastness of history. A mainstream historical fact lingers in your mind. The Black Death reshaped societies, economies, and even cultures, setting in motion changes that would ripple through centuries, ultimately altering the course of history. You recall the fringe tales of plague doctors with their eerie bird masks, the flagellants marching in penance, and villagers whispering of supernatural protections. These stories, strange and sometimes unsettling, remind you how people coped with the unimaginable. Historians still argue about many aspects, the precise reasons the plague disappeared, whether it was changes in rat populations, human immunity, or environmental shifts. The mystery remains a puzzle, inviting endless curiosity. You breathe deeply, feeling the cool night air fill your lungs and calm your restless thoughts. The oak's branches sway gently above whispering secrets in the wind. The village sleeps around you, slowly healing a fragile ember glowing in the darkness. Now, as you close your eyes and prepare to drift, remember, history isn't just about dates and facts, it's about the people who lived, suffered, and survived. You are part of that story too. The night deepens softly around you, the weight of centuries settling into quiet calm. The harsh echoes of plague and fear fade into distant shadows, replaced by gentle whispers of hope and renewal. The scent of rosemary lingers faintly in the cool air, a subtle reminder of endurance and healing. Your breath slows each inhale and exhale a soothing rhythm, carrying you gently toward rest. Imagine the village now, quiet streets bathed in moonlight, windows glowing softly with candlelight. The steady pulse of life returning like a heartbeat after a long, dark winter. Feel the comforting embrace of time's slow passage, the endless dance between darkness and light. You are safe here, surrounded by history's vastness and humanity's quiet courage. Let your thoughts drift like autumn leaves on a gentle breeze, softening, fading until sleep carries you effortlessly away. Sweet dreams.